You could follow the instructions, but you can also throw the instructions out. I wake up and I feel like I'm more passionate about the problem that we're trying to solve than I was 10 years ago, and I think that's a good sign. AirPods are the de facto standard. We shouldn't have the tool we use to listen to music in our ears have better acoustic performance than the tool that can make critical life-saving calls. That's just not right.
The stethoscope is one of the most recognizable symbols in medicine. And yet, for over 2 centuries, that technology has more or less been about the same. I talked with Connor Landgraf, co-founder and CEO of Eko Health, about what happens when you rethink a tool that defines the doctor-patient relationship and use it to help doctors unlock even more clarity in the process. We get into why early listening is more subjective than we realize, how early disease hides in sound, and what it takes to bring AI into medicine without breaking trust at the bedside. It's a conversation about honoring an iconic symbol of medicine while quietly giving it new power. Well, Connor, thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast. I'm really excited to talk to you.
Great to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Yeah, of course. So you've had such an incredible career already, and you've spoken before publicly about this childhood where you were homeschooled and a self-described tinkerer and builder, even as a kid. I'm so curious, can you remember the first thing that you built, fixed, tinkered with?
Ooh, the very first thing. Well, definitely some funny stories from childhood of just loving creating things. I had a desk in my office that I almost caught on fire by forgetting to turn off a soldering iron and leaving it all on the desk. Probably was like 12 or something like that when I did that. Ended up burning like this big charred section of this wood desk. But there's definitely some really fun moments growing up where I just really felt like I loved the art of creation, the creativity that goes into it. I got a robotics kit when I must have been 8 or 9, and ended up putting it together. I had like a really simple circuit board, the little bit of a tutorial to programming, just some basic. It was actually basic, the programming language, but being able to realize that you could create something and then you could also remix it. Like, hey, you could follow the instructions, but you can also throw the instructions out and change it up at the end as well. Those were pretty formative memories, and I ended up really just liking the idea of using computers in particular. So I ended up kind of developing a curiosity for programming, buying some programming books, and like any nerd in the early 2000s, just falling in love with the art of creating things online as well, making websites early in my teens. So a lot of those kind of random moments, but all with that center of like just experimenting, breaking things, remixing things, was something I really, really felt like just scratched a big itch for me.
That's so cool. Did you always know that the things you wanted to be building were going to be in the health space, the medical space? When did that come about?
I didn't know. That wasn't necessarily very clear to me at the time. I just liked the art of exploration and tinkering, the art of discovery in some way, and ended up in through high school getting the opportunity to dive more into biology. And there's no more complex and still unfully discovered, like undefined system than biology. And that there's still so many paradigms that we think are rigid that are not necessarily as rigid as we think they are. And so I think there was that kind of just unique wonder of biology, and that in the same way that if you're discovering new geography, if you were an explorer hundreds of years ago discovering land for the first time or making a scientific discovery, that medicine was just chock full of those, and it was never going to, or human biology, but biology in general was just chock full of those, and it was never going to, it just still feels like so far off that we're going to be able to actually map our understanding of how biology works. And so I think sticking those things together, I wanted to go and study how you could tinker with these really complex systems. And so ended up falling in love with the idea of biomedical engineering, that it was the breadth and kind of unique variety of disciplines of engineering, but with that biological spin to it.
That's so neat. I love the word that you used when you talked about the paradigm of thinking, because so much of what you ended up building to me feels like challenging a very, very accepted paradigm in medicine, or almost like an icon of how we think about practicing medicine. But we'll get to that, I'm sure. I'm wondering if you could walk through the original eureka moment that led you to direct your gaze in the stethoscope.
It was, the fake story of, if you want to call it that, was that there was that single moment. The reality is it was much more like a dozen different small light bulb moments that we had. But there was some formative time where we were all together working on this, and it was in a really biodesign-esque class at Berkeley, run by a faculty member there with a focus on medtech innovation. And the idea was teach a course on how you can do medtech innovation, from needs finding to regulatory analysis to understanding clinical requirements, what would going to be the performance criteria, what would be the prototyping phase, like how you wrap all of those into, a mock medical device exercise. And the conversations we had as part of those needs finding exercises were the ones that were particularly enlightening. And one of the exercises was about reimagining what the stethoscope could be. And it just struck me that, everything in medicine is so compressed for time, and asking a provider to do something that takes, seconds to minutes is a big ask. The time is very precious. And yet there is this exam that we do on almost every single patient that, to what, as many of the providers said, doesn't really give us that much value. And we don't feel like we get much utility from it. We just do it because the patient expects us to do it. And that was, not coming from a clinical background necessarily. That was really surprising. But I also just had the conviction, hey, there is information here. And early disease detection, and particularly with a focus on cardiovascular and pulmonary disease, is this big unmet need. And we could really try to change the paradigm for the timeliness and the quality of those early detection events. And so, at the time, I had a background in software development, that kind of tinkering software development work that I wrote terrible quality code. It was embarrassing. But I knew enough to say, hey, this is actually a really good problem for computers, and that there's the opportunity to aid the human in the act of listening and evaluating these sounds from the stethoscope for cardiovascular and pulmonary conditions.
It seems from the outsider's perspective that the Eko ecosystem and your products do so much and are so powerful now. And I'm curious, at the very beginning, in these early moments when you were sort of looking at the stethoscope as a problematic tool with opportunity to innovate, what was that first improvement that you saw as a real change maker, if that originally inspired your work?
Yeah. I think what we first recognized was, hey, if we want to make this a digital, accurate, repeatable exam, if we want consistent performance, then we do need an algorithmic approach to this, that human hearing is just always going to be very fallible and subjective. It's probably one of the most fallible senses we have. I mean, if you think about vision, the way that we can picture things and have some more precision there, acoustic is actually very, very subjective. We don't hear things in a way that's consistent. We hear things in a very non-linear fashion. You imagine you hear low frequencies and high frequencies the same. The reality is that our hearing follows this very, very non-linear process. And we also have really bad temporal resolution in hearing. It's really hard for us to tell timing of events with hearing things. We're very good at voice, specifically human voice, but if it's not human voice, it gets a lot more challenging for us. And so we said, there's a really cool opportunity to do this in a digital fashion. But to get that, to be even able to build those algorithms, we got to have a digital front end, a data acquisition front end. I got to have a digital platform to be able to actually capture acoustics in medicine. And when we looked around, like the devices on the market were just really not stuff that was going to be used in a real clinical fashion. And right around this time, mobile was getting very mature. Of course, every company that's, every technology that comes is always just the right time in terms of where the market is, where the technology is. We were lucky in that Bluetooth was getting really mature. Mobile devices were being accepted in the clinical setting for the first time. The early generation AI algorithms were just starting to get going around this time. I mean, this was 10 years ago. Like, this was before so many of these like critical moments in this history of AI and machine learning. But all of those were like just starting to emerge, and we said, wow, this is definitely solvable. But we also realized, like, hey, if you're going to build a machine learning based approach, you've got to have a huge data set. Like, data set is going to be everything to feed these algorithms. And we went out to health systems and tried to license one. We said, someone's got to have a big database of heart sounds or lung sounds. And the largest in the world was about 3,000 recordings. And we said, oof, like, this is orders of magnitude off. And so we're going to need to digitize first and do this in a series of small stepstones, but build the digital infrastructure, get it in the market, do data collection with a lot of different partners, do it in a prospective fashion, get gold standard diagnostic data that's associated with these recordings, and then use that to train the models. But we knew it was going to be not an overnight process, that's for sure.
Wow. I have some thoughts about this process I'd love to ask you about. I've heard that the first prototype that you designed maybe didn't feel stethoscopy enough for doctors, if that's the right way to put it. I'm curious what that looked like and what the mismatch was between that and sort of the dominant design that doctors, nurses, clinicians were kind of missing.
Yeah. Early on, we did 5 or 6 different form studies. And I say that in as much as they were just really rapid prototypes and concepts. You can use the fancy terminology, or you can say, hey, we just like built this design and said, does it look good? But we were able to do that really quickly. And we had some wacky ones. I mean, we said, well, hey, what if we put something in the earpieces of the stethoscope? Hey, you take your own stethoscope and you just like put a digital set of ears, a little box that you plug the earpieces into, but you can keep the stethoscope you have. And not surprisingly,
so
that was not...
You don't listen to it.
No, you don't listen to it. Yeah, you actually just take the ear tips, like pull them off, plug them into this little digital brain, and let it listen on its own. Wasn't well received, very clunky, but it was it's just an out of the box idea. We came up with one that was like truly a little, handheld device, no ear tips at all, like a chest piece and then a little transmitter attached to it, but take the earpieces out entirely. Also not well received. And the feedback from these providers was like, there's just something so symbolic and iconic about this design and this shape, and that you can change it and you can tweak it, but it still has to have the essence of the stethoscope. And I don't think we could even appreciate it at the time, but like having now worked on this in this category for a really long time now, the stethoscope is arguably the most iconic product on planet Earth in terms of its recognizability. I mean, we're up there with like the Apple logo or the Nike swoosh or, the Coca-Cola logo in terms of worldwide recognition. Like, you see it and you're like, yeah, it's a stethoscope. I mean, it's the symbol of medicine in like every iconography set you can imagine. And so it's kind of got to look like that for it to be accepted, and for physicians to feel comfortable with it, and also for patients to feel comfortable with it. I've always loved this part of the company because we get to try to bring novel ideas and think about things and what should the stethoscope look like in 5 years or 10 years, and yet do so from this place of like a little bit of reverence and respect for the just absolute iconography and credibility that this tool represents. And, we get to build tools for the most competent, educated, credible, and trusted people on the planet, physicians and healthcare providers. And so we want to build something that they're really proud of, that they're proud to wear, that we're proud to give to them, and that, hopefully gives them superpowers in terms of their own clinical acumen and diagnostic accuracy. So it's been a really fun, like, industrial design and just like aesthetic challenge to work on as we thought about what should the stethoscope look like in 5 or 10 years.
That's so cool. What an interesting dynamic. Connor, I think a lot about this really curious tension in what your product does and how I have thought about opportunities for innovation in the past, and sort of classically, like, one of the smoking gun opportunities always seems like when there is an artisanal approach to what the doctor is doing, or when there's that kind of like Malcolm Gladwell Blink moment where, I'm a surgeon, but most doctors in general look at their intern year of residency as being like one of the milestones being that you can glance at a patient and know, like, sick or not sick, just like at a glance, as like a sort of a skill set that's incorporating all these intangibles. And in the health tech, med tech space, I think we often think of those kind of like artisanal approach or kind of gestalt clinical reasoning as like opportunities to innovate. And what is so interesting to me about what you are doing is straddling that rich source of information that sort of flows to the clinician without interrupting it. It's almost like you're adding another layer without sort of saying you can't do this thing anymore that feels very special and unique. And I'm just curious how you have thought about that as you build all of these things.
Yeah, it's a really great observation and definitely parallels with the things we've observed. I mean, I'd add another dimension to it, which is like, it is this crucial moment in a physician feeling like they have the opportunity to provide very physical care. It's also the moment for the patient to feel cared for. Like, touching the patient, laying hands on them is really critical in terms of them just feeling like, hey, the doctor heard me. They're like providing care. And a lot of people describe it as like, hey, if you're not doing the physical exam, patients just feel like they're listened to, but maybe not cared for in some way. And so that physical exam is, it's this like touching, not holy, almost holy moment where the provider is like laying hands on the patient and caring for them. And the stethoscope exam is that, is one of those key moments. We can't get in the way of that. We've got to like make them feel, we got to elevate that. We got to make that even more, an even more rich moment for the physician and the patient. And at the same time, we got to like bring cutting edge AI and innovation to market that makes them feel more confident and increases their diagnostic accuracy, and delivers that like consistent, reliable performance for every provider, for a first year nursing nurse and for a veteran cardiologist. Like, hopefully they all get the exact same performance from our algorithms. And so I still think we're so far off from this. Like, again, I look at our products today and there's nothing more frustrating to me than feeling like, man, we have not yet nailed it. It's both frustrating and exciting in that I feel like, man, if we can, if we continue to push this forward, this can be so much better in 3-4 years with what's coming down the pipeline. But I do think that like making it a workflow that is unobtrusive as much as possible, that tries to give that moment for the physician and for the patient, and then kind of adds the technology, adds the algorithms as a adjunct to it, has been our goal. But I still think we're still quite far off from perfecting that.
When's the first moment, if you had to look back, that you felt like your device was crossing the threshold of being kind of interest, a gadget, a nicer version of, and maybe shifting into something that was changing the way that care could be provided and making that kind of impact?
I can think of a few moments. I think we always feel like those moments in education, med education, where the product has been particularly quickly adopted, feels like a bellwether of where the technology is going to go and how it's going to be accepted. If you're the training tool, if you're the tool that people use in med school, you hope that they then are lifelong users, and you get to kind of change the curriculum. If you change the curriculum, you change the future. And we've seen that with Apple if you own the college campus, you own the next generation of the workforce, and they will bring the technology with them. Even though Mac is, wasn't historically an enterprise IT tool necessarily, but if you brought it from campus, there were ways that it could inculcate that next generation. And so I think those have been some of the moments for us, and getting to partner with some of the world-class auscultation educators or physical exam educators and bringing that into the curriculum. One of the pieces that was pretty cool was just being able to show, we call it the phonocardiogram, but it's the audio waveform of the sound. And we always thought it was funny in that like med school textbooks teach heart sounds with pictures. Of course they do. Like there's no audio in the textbook, but you see the picture of like, okay, this is an S1, S2, nice double peaks of the mitral and tricuspid, aortic and pulmonic valves opening and closing. Like that was the waveform. And then you see, this is the aortic stenosis waveform, the peaking systolic murmur, or the continuous systolic murmur of mitral regurgitation. But you see these pictures, and then you go to you go to your rounds and listen to the patient with aortic stenosis, and like, can you connect a picture in your head to what you're hearing? Like that's a pretty hard visual auditory connection to make. And so with our device, just being able to show the waveform in real time was pretty cool, and that people could then really appreciate what they were listening to. And you just talk about like the auditory temporal accuracy. It's way easier if you have a visual companion that goes with it, and you're like, I can play back, I can hear it, play it again. Okay, I know what I'm listening to, and I can hear that. And that training has really been quickly adopted, and has been a big source of feedback from students and faculty when they're doing education for heart sounds and lung sounds too. That was one of those moments where like, okay, I think we can have an impact on like how this category gets taught. And if that's the case, then hopefully we can have a lasting impact on just where this industry goes in general.
That's really neat. Tell me about the process of how you went from this device that was exquisitely helpful at amplifying sound and sort of improving the audio fidelity for the user to this rich source of data and being able to sort of become a diagnostic aid. And you kind of alluded to some of the data infrastructure that you had to build, but I'd love to know what that kind of looked like at the ground level, nuts and bolts.
Yeah. I mean, it was the, how do you build the digital platform that supports this and allows us to make the best use of these signals. And then it was also another level of it was like, what other signals are available that could be more useful? And what is the minimum set of signals you would need that could build the most accurate, most broad, one-shot early detection product for cardiovascular and pulmonary diseases? Like, hey, if we wanted to build this one-shot exam that would allow us to point the physician to the next diagnostic step, and serve as that orange flag, red flag, green flag, not diagnostic on its own, but rather the like signal pointing tool that could improve the quality of cardiac and pulmonary triage in frontline care. Like, what would be that basic set of signals? And shortly after we built our first product with heart sounds, we really got excited about the potential with ECG. We looked at a bunch of research. The interesting thing was there was this whole category of products called acoustic cardiography back in the 60s, before ultrasound. And they were these big boxes, but they could capture electrical activity through ECG and mechanical activity through heart sounds simultaneously and synchronize the signals. And we started looking at some of those papers, and they were, it was a very compelling tool that was kind of one of the standards pre-echocardiography. And that got our wheels turning. We said, hey, there is a really, really unique opportunity here for us to marry the electrical and acoustic signals, the musculature and the blood flow signals, and then synchronize them and feed these into deep learning models to help us understand cardiac function in a totally new way. And if we can feed these signals into deep learning models, we're going to find a lot of unique correlations, because this was already done 50 years ago with really basic signal processing. Like we are not even close to understanding the depth of these signals. And so it was at that time we were like, okay, this is big. We should go all in on this. And that kicked off the focus on ECG and heart sounds in the next generation devices. with the same goal of build a big data set, annotate as much of it as we can with gold standard diagnostic data. And then we're going to start to make discoveries. And if we build it, we will find really unique signals that we can create different algorithm models on. And so that started to then lead to the next generation heart failure with reduced ejection fraction models, the structural heart disease, structural murmur detection models, and then kind of building onto this array of, okay, we're building that one-shot, very rapid cardiac triage wayfinding tool that can kind of flag up or flag down patients. And that's still the kind of thesis that we're pursuing with the next generations of the algorithms as well.
If I'm understanding correctly, are you seeing a future where your stethoscope could be applied to someone's chest or their back, and something that we aren't used to learning about what's beneath the skin would be apparent to someone? Is that just to kind of distill it down what you're thinking about?
Yeah, I do think, I mean, all the original algorithms were do what a physician can do, but hopefully with, consistency, more accuracy at the cardiologist level. Hey, let's match the cardiologist in terms of accuracy of murmur detection or arrhythmia detection. And then some of the more recent algorithms have really been about, like, let's look at signals or let's try to predict things that would typically not be possible for a provider to predict on their own. And that was this reduced ejection fraction algorithm that we could likely, and not give a numeric value, not say the patient has 50% or 20% EF, but rather kind of bin them into categories and say low or high, red flag, orange flag, green flag for reduced ejection fraction. Something that, again, wasn't something that you would typically be able to ascertain from ECG or from heart sounds independently or in combination.
So interesting. I think a lot about the future where assistive technology might take us from a diagnostic perspective. And there must be a scenario in the not too distant future where your device is almost being polite to the user by including them in the loop and able to sort of pull much more rich diagnostic data almost on its own, almost like letting a kid watch their parent work and kind of feel like they're doing it. Is that something you have allowed yourselves to imagine?
It's not that you're not the first person to ask us that question. We get asked that question a lot of, like, hey, when does the physician just need to stop listening? When do you take the earpiece
It's so
off?
uncomfortable. It's so uncomfortable to even think about. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think our answer is that we're not trying to push that. We think it's really critical that the physician plays a big role in this care. And at the end of the day, no algorithm is 100% accurate. There are always going to be cases that slip through, and the physicians, we don't want to create a future in which the physician doesn't feel confident in evaluating this decision on their own. We don't want to erode that diagnostic accuracy of the provider. We want to aid them. We want them to feel more confident in their decision because of the data we provide. But at the end of the day, it's still their decision, and we want to empower them in that process. And so I think we're pretty firm in that we think it's really important for the physicians to be better and more confident and feel more educated as a result of our products. And that we also have an important job in offering the explainability and justification for the calls that we do make. And we're still not there yet too, but we think a lot about, like, algorithmic explainability. How do you show the algorithms work to the physician so that they can double check it and trust it, and then be able to assess it if there are those false positives or false negative calls or something like that. But that said, I mean, we are consistently showing that when physicians use our products, they perform substantially better than unaided physicians. And that's been shown again and again and again in our own studies and in independent real world studies. And so we think there's a really key role that our products can play in supporting those providers.
That's so neat. I had someone else on the podcast a couple months ago who, Shiv Gaglani, he created an educational platform that has really changed things for medical students.
Yeah.
And when we were sort of musing towards the end, he was talking about the analogy of a future where we're not using some of these assistive technologies in medicine would be like trying to formulate a diagnosis of a heart attack without your ECG. And when you're talking about this right now, it's such an interesting analog because with the ECG, now you have medical students who, just like when I went to med school, you learn this very crude pattern for where the directions of electricity flow in the heart and where the leads are placed. And so we have these squiggly lines that we see printing out, but we have a mental model of algorithm, data, whatever you call it. We have this mental model of what's producing that signal and translating it back. And I am hearing something that sounds similar to the way you're describing about this explainability.
Yeah, absolutely. And that the physician should be able to, decipher or understand where the signals and where they're coming from, and hopefully the physiology behind them. And yet, like you said, we can't. These technologies all would be viewed as like practicing medicine with your hand tied behind their back in the future, and so they're going to be a critical part in the decision making process, and they should, but they shouldn't. The tool shouldn't replace the tool user.
Connor, when you look back on the journey you've taken so far, kind of connecting the dots backwards, are there any moments in retrospect that feel like they were really pivotal?
There have been so many, and it's been a long journey for us too. It's super cliche, but I think you probably ask every medtech innovator, every innovator ever probably, and they'd say that if they could have known how hard the journey was going to be and how long it would have taken, they never would have started. And yet, I think the principles that have just always felt super clear are, if you want to build something meaningful, it's going to take a long time. And you just got to make sure you have the juice in the tank and you're excited about that problem and passionate about it to spend a lot of time working on it. There are times when I think about like, hey, is this going, could I imagine that this is the thing that I work on for the rest of my career? Like this is the category of problem. And that's both daunting and also exciting at the same time. It is such a meaningful problem that it feels like there's so much left to do that we are just scratching the surface 10 years in, still just scratching the surface on the stuff we want to do. And recognizing that we have to have the juice in the tank, and we have to like continually push harder and faster, because the natural entropy of everything, but startups especially, is to go slow and to get slower over time. It's like your fastest days as a startup are when you are 5 people in a garage, and you just literally get slower every day, and unless you are like constantly fighting against that battle, and that's tiring, and you've got to have the mental energy to do that, and you have to be making sure that you are pulling the company to be faster. You aren't naturally leading to that like entropy and slowdown. I think that's been like an interesting lesson and observation we've learned over the years. I think maybe particularly pivotal moments, there are moments that stick with you, like the very first time you get an FDA clearance. I can remember that one. Waking
Not
up
just
in the
the
morning.
first time. You guys were the youngest group that ever got a medical device FDA cleared.
I think as far as we're aware, there's no plaque. We didn't get a plaque from the FDA for that one, but we'll stick with it. I think we probably were, but those moments where there are moments that you think you'll really remember for the rest of your life in terms of the meaningfulness of them, and those feelings of, hey, we've reached a pinnacle here. And then of course there's another peak that's just beyond the horizon that then becomes the next challenge to tackle. The thing that has always felt so exciting to me was when independent researchers would take our technology and go and do something unique with it. And I think our category is pretty cool in that, and just that we're an acoustic tool. We're a digital acoustic medicine tool. And that can be applied to a lot of different categories. Like our laser focus has been cardiac, but there have been loads of providers who've taken it and done research on totally novel targets or totally novel applications that we never would have thought of ourselves. We had a research group use it to look at diabetic fistulas and looking at vascular flow using the sound, just listening to the vascular flow in that fistula and try to predict when they were likely to fail. And showed like really, really strong signal, and hard product to commercialize and bring to market. It wasn't necessarily going to be something that we would do, but a super cool application of it. And partners who are building algorithms for pulmonary diseases in underserved clinical focus areas in global health that we are thrilled to be able to support. Just these random, branching tree applications that come from, hey, if you have a really high quality acoustic capture tool, there's a lot of places in the body that produce sound. And a lot of those, probably all of those should be algorithmic to some extent. And, you could have an app store of algorithms to assess different physiologic sounds and be able to aid in assessment. So I think those have been the coolest things. And it's been this incredible challenge for us because we have to stay focused and we have to say no to all those things. And there's so many cool science projects that come out of it. But you die and you live by the ability to say, hey, we're going to do a small set of things and we're going to do those things exceptionally well. And then we do have to try to say no to a lot of other stuff or find ways to support others, but not get distracted by those shiny objects. So those have been moments where, I'm just really, really proud of what the team has built and excited to see where others take the technology to.
You've shared a little bit about the future and sort of the fully realized vision, maybe that you've sort of alluded to not being there yet or still have a ways to go. If you could kind of daydream with me just for a second and look out to that future, or maybe even another football field beyond that sort of fully realized vision, what does that look like to you?
There's one big North Star that we talk about a lot internally, and that is we believe there's a very near future where the tool around every provider's neck is digital. That just fundamentally is going to happen. That there's going to be a time where we say, hey, a hollow tube that we use to channel sound from patient to your ears is just that's not going to cut it. You got to have better acoustic performance. You got to have the ability to have kind of digital capabilities. AirPods are the de facto standard. We shouldn't have the tool we use to listen to music in our ears have better acoustic performance than the tool that can make critical life-saving calls. That's just not right. And so that's North Star. Digital technology around the neck of every single provider on the planet. And, we've got a lot of ways to get there. There's all right, let's get to the point where the majority of stethoscopes sold are digital. We think that one's coming sooner. But that's, that's the door, that's the future that gives us the right to do a lot of other things after that. And then it is really about building this battery of applications. And at some level, if we have a digital tool that sits on every provider's neck, we also have a mini computer that sits around every provider's neck that can run software. And today it runs cardiac software. It's going to run pulmonary software in the future, pulmonary algorithms, but it can run a lot more than that too. And this could be a tool that runs applications, and we could do, we can be a digital assistant to the physician. We can partner with companies that are doing scribing, and this can be a controller or a microphone input source for them. We could be, enabling voice queries for AI clinical decision support. Could be used for clinical communications. There's just a lot of different applications that can run on this digital computer that sits around the neck. And it's a computer that is workflow friendly, comfortable for the physicians to use, totally expected, doesn't break that expected behavior of a physician or of a provider. That gives us 15 years of stuff we can do. But first and foremost, it's bring all of those devices around the provider's necks into a digital future, and we're going to be the company that does that.
Connor, I'm sure you give advice to young engineers, students, folks who are inspired by what you do. What do you tell people who either don't have an idea yet, but are passionate and want to get their idea, or people that have the earliest itch that they haven't even formed into a cohesive concept yet, that want to know what they should do next?
I think the things I always recommend are, first and foremost is embrace randomness. This is one thing that we've found is we've been successful by just pursuing a lot of different branches a lot of different places, a lot of different conversations, even fundraising. Like, so much of our fundraising process has been take every meeting, even the ones you don't think are going to be fruitful, and just pursue that tree branch network effect as much as possible. And, have those conversations, pursue the, network with a researcher that seems totally outside of your comfort zone. But embrace a little bit of that randomness, that little bit of entropy that I think is really critical in opening up the maximum number of paths possible in your life. And I think, especially for people early in their career, it's you want to have a lot of entropy in the people you meet, the technologies you pursue, the job focus areas that you have, as much as possible, so that you get the opportunity to explore widely. And I think that's been a key part of our entrepreneurial journey, was just those kind of key randomness moments that were really critical in figuring out our path. And then I think the second piece of advice I always say is just find something that you just really, really like doing, a problem that you're excited to work on. Because it's going to be brutally hard. It's going to be exhausting. It's going to be extremely stressful. There's going to be so many days where you wake up and you're like, I don't want to do this. And I don't feel, for whatever reason, the challenge you're facing feels insurmountable. But, kind of falling in love with that problem and just being excited to work on that, like having that underlying mission or excitement, makes everything easier to power through. And so that when you have those bad days, you can still kind of work through them and say, hey, but the journey we're on is still worthwhile. And so I think we've just, I still feel, I wake up and I feel like I'm more passionate about the problem that we're trying to solve than I was 10 years ago. And I think that's a good sign.
That's incredible. Well, Connor, thank you so much for talking with me. Where can people connect with you online if they want to learn more?
You can check out our website, Eko Health, ekohealth.com, or feel free to add me on LinkedIn, and hopefully I can connect from there too.
Wow. Well, this has been such a treat to talk to you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, David. Really enjoyed the conversation.